Now we're going to talk for a while, and then we're going to open it up to questions, and we will have somebody with a microphone. So make sure you wait for the microphone before you ask your question, so everybody can hear you. And but first, we're going to start off. I'm going to. There's some things that you have said talking about the movie, Nicolas, that I want to talk about, and I want to hear you expound upon them. And the first off was you said one of the inspirations for you making the film was that you thought it'd be great to make a Western in Asia. Why?
Well, it started with a 2-picture deal. Because I was going to make Only God Forgives Before Drive. And so some years ago, I had kind of discovered that an average French film cost 6 million euros. And I went to Paris and met with Wild Bunch and Gaumont because I had been working with Wild Bunch on another movie. And I said to them, I'll give you 2 movies for 6. And they went, okay. And then they said, okay, how about this? How about you come up with 1 million euros, we'll put 2 million euros. And I said, okay. And how about this? You put 2 million euros, I'll put 1 million euros, but then I write, produce, and direct. And they said, deal. But in order to finalize it, we need 2 synopses. I said, okay. Give me a day, and I went home to kind of think about, and because in the independent world, the most sure in terms of financial, making money is genre films. That's really left. So I came back and I said, I'll do a fight movie that's a Western in Bangkok. They went, deal. Okay. And then from then it was like, that was kind of the oral kind of approach to the kind of genre film. There was going to be like a classic sheriff, bad guy, Western mythology, set it in Bangkok and about Muay Thai fighting.
Right. Now you were familiar with Bangkok because I think you had gone there on holiday or something. And why did that strike you as a great place to set something like this?
Well, yes, Thailand is very popular amongst Scandinavians and people of the north because we don't have a lot of sun, and they have it in Thailand, and it's great value for your money, and they love kids. So a lot of people from that region go there. So I was coming with my wife there and our kids, and we always made a big point of going through Bangkok because we really liked Bangkok. It was just like a crazy city to me. It's like a mixture of LA and New York. It's just gigantically insanity. But so I began to think, and I came to New York when I was 8 years old and stayed for 10 years with my mother and my stepfather. So I don't really have a kind of a country identity, and I actually like to travel to different places and live for a certain amount of times. So I thought it would be great to go to Thailand and live for 6 months. Wouldn't that be fun? My wife was, no, it wouldn't. So it was like, oh, okay. So I kind of like, but after like certain amount of times coming there, I began to see, well, God, if I could make a movie here, that would be a great reason for us to come here then. And so that kind of started it. And then I began to see that it was a very magical city, especially at night when all the kind of westernized Disneyland went away, and Bangkok at night became very Thai, but very magical and supernatural, and became very odd place to be. And I felt this could be a great arena for a film. And knowing that in the back of my head when I was with Wild Bunch of Gaumont, and knowing that I would get a lot of value for my money at the same time shooting there, it was like a combination of those things.
Now, on just the description of it, it sounds like a very a simple concept for the movie. Like you said, it's a Western. It's a bad guy, good guy. There's 2 brothers. One dies, mother comes to get revenge. But there is a lot more in there. And one of the themes that you've also talked about, and I'd love for you to kind of give us your impressions of how you developed that and within that story, is the fact that our police lieutenant, he believes he's God, or he believes he has that authority, and then we have on his opposite Ryan Gosling's character, who is looking for something to believe in, looking for religion, I think is how you put it. After I saw the film, that was the thing that stuck with me, like a couple days afterwards. That's the thing that I was chewing on in my head afterwards. Can you talk about that theme that runs through the film?
The way that I work is that I approach everything like pornography. So, well, I come from a country that invented pornography. I come up with ideas of what I would like to see. And then when I have X amount of ideas on index cards, I put them down and I get some kind of construction, like a story reveals itself within it. And then I expand on that, and then it changes, and then it becomes the film. And I thought, okay, if a fight movie is interesting to do for me because I've never fought in my life. I don't really watch fight movies. I don't really know a lot about martial art films or anything like that. But I like the concept of it. Was very intriguing because the idea of a male fist is obviously a sexual extension, and it's a combination of sex and violence in the male's hand. But when you open it, it's about submission. And I thought that movement was a movie, especially when it came to fight concepts of a film. So that was one idea that kind of began the whole idea of making this film. I was going through a very existentialistic time in my life. My wife was pregnant with our second child, and it was a very difficult pregnancy. And we were constantly living in the unknown of what was going to happen for 9 months. And that really messes with your mind. And the idea that I couldn't understand why I had to go through this, you've kind of tried to figure out why am I going through all this and not knowing, and the idea that the womb creates and the womb is like God. I felt, God, if you're putting me through all this pain, I really want to fight you. So the idea that a man wants to fight God and kind of overall concept started to kind of materialize, that then came to this idea of, well, okay, what about doing a mother and son story also? Because if there was going to be an antagonist in this film, it had to be a woman, I felt, and not a man, which is usually very dominant. So a mother was so terrifying as a creature, I felt, especially in a world of so-called, Western concepts. So those kind of combinations started materializing, and then all those ideas kind of had to take shape, and then they slowly did that throughout the film.
That I think that's a great segue into our first clip that we want to watch here. So if we can play the clip, and let's take a look at that, and we'll talk about this after.
So, tell me, what line of work are you in?
I'm an entertainer.
An entertainer. And how many cops can you entertain with that cute little cum dumpster of yours? What do you think of his line of work? I'm not talking about the fag boxing club. I'm talking about where the money comes from. You know what he does, right? He deals drugs, man. Heroin, cocaine. someone cares. Because I swear to God, sometimes I think Julian hated Billy. Maybe hate is the wrong word. But you were always jealous of him. You know the way boys are, May. Well, with Billy being the older brother and having a bigger cock, Julian's was never small, but Billy's was, oh, it was enormous. Billy was everything Julian wanted to be. Is that not true? Because let me tell you, if the tables were turned, your brother would have found your killer and brought me his head on a fucking platter. And you just sit there thinking he got what he deserved. I don't want to talk about it. Do you mind if I smoke?
Well, then there's that. Okay. One of the things that struck me immediately watching the film is that that you set up a world, a tone, and then you, by design, introduce this character who is a bull in a china shop, with very long blonde hair. Now, my curiosity is you hear laughter, but this is not ha-ha laughter. This is holy crap! I cannot believe she just said that laughter. As you're writing that, as you're mapping it out, and then as you're filming it, how are you kind of modulating that in your mind?
Well, the idea that the film essentially in the end became a mother and son story. And then when I had that, I kind of came up with the brother being killed, the mother coming to town, wanting revenge, very much like a Lady Macbethian approach, the two classic Cain and Abel struggling it out and so forth. It was like, okay, then the film actually becomes more, besides the whole revenge theme, it was also a different images of a mother and son relationship. And in the end, the whole movie became about a man who's chained to his mother's womb. And in order to confront his mother, this mysterious Thai policeman uncovers that. He's like the gateway into his confrontation with his mother. And of course, then there had to be a scene between him and his mother and another girl, because that's the classic mother and son dilemma, is that when you bring home your first girlfriend, and it's the most frightening thing in the whole entire world. And you just hope that she doesn't tear you to pieces. And and the idea, of course, also that it preys upon that there's a sexual relationship between his mother and himself, and there was sexuality between the brothers and their mothers, and how that devours the whole family, and how the mother's like an insect. She just eats everything she approaches. So it's a very much a heightened fairy tale construction, of course. Right. And then it's also about, because I shoot my films in chronologically order, when we get to scenes, a lot of times it's like, okay, where are we? How is it moving? How are the characters, And the idea that it was going to be like a one monologue from the mother, basically showing her power, but also her contempt at the same time, her whole, kind of godlike theatrical aspects of how she sees herself. And so I was with Ryan in Bangkok, and we were living together basically in the same in two different apartments, but like tied together. So we were sitting in the scene, it was like, okay, so what would you need to hear as a character to react the way you need to react in the following scene? And sometimes the trick is when I want to get to somewhere, I just don't know how to get there sometimes, so we have to figure it out how to get there. And I was like, okay, so she has to be very humiliating to this lovely Thai actress or like girl. So I asked Ryan, so what's the worst thing you can call a woman in America? And he came with a list. and on that list, top of the list was this word, cum dumpster. And my first question was, well, what does that mean? Okay, explaining. Okay, got it. All right. So then I went to Kirsten Scott Thomas, which is KST from now on. So I went to KST and I said, all right, you're going to, because she has a speech teacher with her because she had to go. The movie was originally written as a British film because I changed lead character from one actor to another actor. It became Ryan. She had to change into an American. And so I said, you're going to say, cum dumpster first. And she's like, what's that? Okay. I explained what a cum dumpster was to KST. She goes, oh, okay. But then of course, the comedy is that then she has to rehearse the Americanized pronunciation. And you do that by singing. So on set, she was singing, cum dumpster, working on that accent. And it became almost like, it was just like the most ironic situation because, it became like you thought it was caught in Saturday Night Live, at the same time.
Now, let's talk about KST. I'll use KST too. How she came upon the look, the Donatella Versace kind of look. How did that? I mean, was that of her own accord? Did she bring it to you and go, what do you think about this? How did it come about?
Well, when I was originally writing the film and was going to make it, it was a purely British cast because it would help with the European financing system because there is a lucrative distribution fund that if you get approved in a certain European way, the distributors independently can get funding to release your film. So that's why a lot of films try to capitalize as European production. And so originally the film was going to be British context, and it was no stars attached. That was the deal I had done with Wild Bunch and Gaumont. So I was casting unknown actresses and actors to be in the film. And I cast a young British actor called Luke Evans to play the protagonist. And then I was casting unknown actors for his mother, basically. Because A, I didn't have the money to pay anyone, and B, I didn't want to deal with the hassle. But then I couldn't find anyone that had the sexuality, the power, the flamboyantness, the acting skills, the look. It's a lot of things needed to fall into place, also at a certain age level. So the casting director said, well, what about Kirsten Scott Thomas? And she's like my mother's favorite actress. I'm like, she's never going to do it. She does whatever she does, And he goes, well, let's just try, because we weren't really going anywhere. I said, okay, well, go for it, So they sent her the script, and she said, I would like to meet. So, okay. So I went to Paris to meet with her. And she's everything you expect her to be. But I also realized she has no problem turning on the bitch switch. So this was going to get interesting. And she very much wanted to do the movie. And she said because she needed to transform to do something different with herself. She was at a time of her career where she wanted to, what she said, do something very, very different than what she was used to.
Right.
And I was like, well, you're preaching to the choir. What would you like to do? And after we kind of talked about the whole mother concept and what she was from and her background and all those ideas and the kind of different approaches to the Medea, theory and all those, the insect theory, she goes, but I need to change my look also. And I was like, well, what would you like to look like? Because clearly the woman, this Miami feel that she comes from, was an idea, but I don't know how it would manifest. I mean, I would always ask her, what would you like to look like? And then she goes, well, let me think about it. And she sent back me a photo of herself with a long blonde wig, saying maybe something like this kind of like, almost like lioness feel. And then I was like, Donatella Versace, here we come.
Well, what's great, and especially following up on what you're able to achieve with Albert Brooks from Drive. I mean, this is much more than a basic cut and dried villain. There's a lot to her in this, and it's funny that filmmakers oftentimes talk about, well, I'll never get this person, but by this point, do you think because of kind of the track record you've set with working with not just Albert and Ryan and Drive, but even before that with Thomas Hardy and Mads Mikkelsen and people like that, that you have that you should have a damn solid reputation with being able to get wonderful performances from actors. I would think that'd precede you. Are you finding that?
I mean, sure, it's gotten easier to get connected to some of the more name-valued actresses or actors. I just think that I always go about with the notion of I just don't want any headaches. So, it's just so much easier, but at the same time, there's a reason why they are what they are. And then I've been very fortunate, working with Matt a lot, or Tom Hardy, or now Ryan. I've been very lucky to have relationships that have been very effective in what I do. But I think I always it's because I also make my films based on how much can I get, how quickly, rather than how much would I like, because then you have, I would like this or like that. Reality is, if I was to start production in 3 months, how much would I be able to raise? Mm-hmm. And that's basically how I work on everything, because then I know it's going to be realistic that I do what I do. If you then get bigger names, great, but it's not about that. And I came at the right place at the right time with her. Same thing with because it was kind of weird, because after Drive premiered at Cannes and it was very well received. Well, some people hated it, some people loved it, but it was at least something a lot of talked about. I got a call from William Morris. And I just, this Luke Evans guy, I had, casted him, worked with him for like 6 months. He was training. I was paying for his training in London and stuff. William Morris calls and says, Luke Evans is out. What? But we're starting in 3 months. I mean, I mean, this is July. I'm in LA at the LA Film Festival. And in September, I go to Bangkok and he's supposed to be there. Like, yeah, sorry, he got off at the Hobbit. Like, what? He got off at the Hobbit? As what? and they were like, well, we don't know, but apparently Peter Jackson just bought him out. Really? Yeah. Too bad, huh? So there I was, suddenly with no actor. And I had Kirsten Scott Thomas. I was like, fuck, what do I do? Because it was really hard. It's like, God, I have to go. This took a long time to find this guy. So then that's, on that period, I was actually with Ryan in LA, and I was like, we were at a place we go to a lot called the 101 Cafe in Los Angeles. And I was like saying, those fucking actors, man, they're the worst. You can't trust them, man. They'll just fuck, on and on and on and on. But then it kind of that night led to, you know what? Let's just do another one. And so, and I remember I called Luke Evans' agent saying, I want you to tell Luke Evans, thank you so much for dropping out. And please, the best of luck with The Hobbit. Really, the best of luck.
Well, and I wanted to ask you, because of you talked about the fact that you consider yourself very lucky to have worked with Mads and Tom and Ryan, and you can obviously add Kristen and Albert to that mix. And what I'm always curious is, and I'd love to hear you talk about this. When you have an actor like that that's capable of just blowing the doors off, as a director, do you go, okay, now I can dig in. I really want to play with them. I really want, get stuff out of them. Or the alternative is that I just get out of the way. I'm going to work on it because they know what they're doing. I'm just going to get out of the way. Which side do you fall on as a director working with actors that can do that?
Well, I mean, good actors would have a heart attack if you went out of the way, because its essential part is the relationship between directing and acting. And it can be a very intimate relationship. I mean, it's a very odd place, because you work so intently and then you leave and you don't see each other again, but you still have this experience that you will never forget if it works out. So, but because I shoot in chronologically order, in a way, it forces the actor or actress to really involve themselves, because every day I would ask them, so what would you like to do today? To constantly keep the idea that this is an organism that can change at any time. So in order to make it work, we have to constantly go on this journey together. But I was always very interested in what the actor, actress see their journey is, because it keeps on developing. So it's just a constant relationship. I do a lot of takes again and again and again. I don't do a lot of setups because I realize it takes long to change setups. I'll just do the same take again and again and again. I like to do that. It's a fine, directing is like being a kindergarten teacher. You have to find the balance where you feel the inspiration take fruit in the actor's or actress's mind, and best if you didn't come up with it. Just because it helps the sense of performance, And then there are certain actresses or actresses that like very specific directions. There are certain performers that will say, I can give you the cold version, the laugh version, the sad version, and then there are actors that everything has to be felt, like it's all about the moment and creating the mood. So it varies very much from different aspects. But it's probably the most important thing a director really needs to know is how you deal with actors, because in the end, it's all about the emotions, and that's what we as an audience essentially connect to.
Right. And talk about the balance between, like, some actors are there immediately, some actors need to warm up, so to speak. How do you balance kind of getting them to actors in the same scene to kind of meet in the middle, so to speak? Or do you worry about that because...
Well, you can't worry about it, because then it's more about sensing the emotion of where you are with who you are, So it's a kind of constant evolution. And then we see what happens. And then you adjust it from there on. I say I shoot rehearsals. I just start shooting from the beginning. I'll shoot everything. And then to the extent where there's nothing left. And then that somewhere in there it worked.
I think this kind of touches on our next clip here. So let's play this second clip, and we'll talk about this. There's such such power in that scene, and certainly from that actor. And one of the things that I really love is how you work with silence. Although I also keenly, like, I was talking to a friend after I saw the movie, and I said, I could imagine when you're editing, because of there are a lot of silences with Ryan where we see his character processing and working, and so I could just see, like, one file which was nothing but shots of Ryan thinking. Yeah.
It says close up of Ryan, close up of Ryan, close up of Ryan, close up of Ryan. Talk. Oh, close up of Ryan, close up of Ryan.
So, and so I wanted to play the scene to talk about how the impact of silence, because there's not dialogue is used very judiciously in this film, and I wonder whether or not that's overall there's a philosophy that you have about using dialogue in film.
Well, it may come from two things. First, English being my second language, so it's hard for me a lot of the times to write. But also, I love silence. To me, silence is the loudest sound there actually exists, because silence is pure emotions. It has nothing to do with logic. It's purely a subjective experience. And cinema was essentially created first as a technical device that was invented. And with that technical device, you would document everyday life activities that then would become a montage. And from that montage, somebody came up with the idea of storytelling with the camera. And with that came the rest of everything. And so I think that in the purity, the idea of a camera and silence is in a way the most, it's the most excessive approach. At the same time, it's the most largest canvas, because then it becomes about interpretation. And because in this day and age, logic is so much based on words, especially from the Western world, that when it disappears, we almost search for it frantically because we're so used to hearing it. And I like that. I like the sense of searching for something, because it forces the viewer to actually go on a journey within the experience.
But do you worry, because as a filmmaker, I can easily see, well, that's my vision. But I can see, like, producers, money people, whatever, going, no, but you have to remind the audience that they're supposed to look at this. You have to tell them in the first act and remind them. Do you ever find yourselves at odds in that tug of war?
Well, I produce my own film, so I can only argue with myself. But
well, that helps.
Which helps, which I do a lot. At the financiers, of course, yeah. I mean, it's always. On Drive was considered a complete failure before it came out by the financiers. It was like written off as a disaster. What was those fucking long talks and nobody's talking? Why are they staring so long? Can't you cut something? No, there's no material. What? There's no material? But they're staring. What the fuck? I'm like, yeah, but they're falling in love. Fuck that, it's like. So it's certainly something that aggravates, because it makes everyone feel uncomfortable, because we're so used to sound, meaning dialogue, moving story along, that cinema becomes less cinematic and more about logistics of verbal explanations, execution. And I just like very much, I'm in my silent mood of making films that relatively almost have no dialogue in them. I'm looking forward to going back and making dialogue films again. But right now, I really enjoy that world of purely forcing myself to tell the story with the camera and design of sound and music and that kind of combination.
Now, I'm going to get one more question in, but everybody get ready with your questions, because you're on after this. All right. I want to talk about your thoughts on violence, and I'm going to repeat a quote to you danger and violence is entertainment when it comes with no consequence. That was your response to somebody asking you about this, and it really applies to this film. The violence that we expect is not the violence that we get so often in this film, which I think is great. You set us up for a big fight, and that fight is not what we're expecting. You set us up for scenes of retribution, but that retribution doesn't happen the way that we would traditionally expect it to happen. So can you talk about that?
Okay, well, violence is a very odd element when it comes to fantasy, because art consists essentially of two motions that constantly at odds with each other, which is sex and violence, desire, fear. Those are the two things that constantly fight. Let's just bear it, sex and violence. And where sex is harder to fantasize about, because in the end it's an act that's very instinctual and normal for most people to do as much as possible. Violence, on the other hand, which is equally a part of our DNA, is pure fantasy, because it's a part of our mentality that we know is wrong to do, but we have it. So we fantasize about it. So that's why violence in fiction, whether it's being literature or painting or music or cinema, whatever, is very much a dominating force. It's a way of externalizing emotions. And I used to say that art is an act of violence. It's meant to penetrate you. And it can do that, of course. And there's a big difference between seeing violence and being violated by what you experience. So, where you can say that in reality, violence is a destructive medium. It only destroys. But in art, violence can inspire. And I'm not talking about, people killing each other in terms of entertainment, but the act that you see something that can violate you is what I find interesting. It's a sense of penetration. It's the closest thing to the act with the viewer becoming a two-way experience. And if you look at our physicality, we were born with violent behavior out of necessity. We have parts of our body can be used for violent acts out of self-preservation. Over the years of man evolutions, those self-preservation became our normality and acceptance that we find a way for society to function. So our violent urges no longer was a necessity to survive, because society created our basic needs. But that doesn't mean the urge in our DNA went away. So suddenly all the parts of our body that were violent became our fantasies instead. And it's more of an acceptance of that. And of course, the combination of eroticism and violence, going back to the male physique of a clenched fist, which is essentially a male extension of his sexuality, but also his violent act.
Okay. All right, you guys are up. All right.
Hello. Hi. Thank you for being here. First question, I got two questions real quick. One is rehearsal. Can you tell us about what happens on the first day of rehearsal? And can you tell us what happens on the last day of rehearsal? And when you're pitching your movies, what have you come to recognize or learn about yourself not to say? And what have you learned that you should say?
What you say is that you're going to make a lot of money. Because that is essentially what it comes down to in the end. There's basically a list. I don't know if there's any filmmakers here, but this is the list that is a great way to think about survival entertainment industry, especially film. We all want to make great films that make a lot of money. Let's call that A. Okay, great. We all aspire to that. It's like Russian roulette. Most of the times it doesn't happen. B, you make good movies, okay, individually, but okay, good movies that doesn't lose money. You can survive on that for the rest of your life. Then you can make good movies that loses money. That's like a Russian roulette, but with 5 bullets in it, because essentially you're going to run out of options. Then you can make bad movies that make a lot of money, but nobody cares, because it's just a commodity then. There's no pleasure in the industry of that behavior. Then you can make bad movies that loses money. That's a one-off. Then you're out. So that's, in a way, very realistically, in terms of surviving in the film industry, where can you try to be on that scale? And generally, if people don't lose money, and they like what you do, you can go on forever. So you tell them what they want to hear. But knowing that you have to deliver it, and also the less money you have, the more chances are they're going to make their money back sooner. So that's why it always goes back to this idea I have. I'll figure out what's the least I need. If I can just make a movie, can I get $2 million? Okay, I'll make the movie $2 million. And that's not even like, I wish I had 10 or 20 or 30 or 150. Because you may make a $100 million movie. You may even get final cut in contract. You're like The Thing, man. You get $100 million and you get final cut. But if that movie doesn't make $500 billion, you're out the door. And you're never going to make another movie afterwards. So it's all about money in the end, meaning that if you don't lose money, you can sustain yourself. And that's a very important lesson to really know. And it took me some time to understand that, especially coming from Europe, where everything is subsidized and it's all about government grants, and you think you're God and you can walk on water and blah, 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 blah. Realize it's not like that, baby. It's very, very different. And regarding rehearsals, rehearsals are painful. Oh, they're so embarrassing. You're so nervous, and nobody wants to say anything. People looking down like that. And so I approach them like, okay, let's just try something. Well, would you like to stand? Would you like to sit over there? And beforehand, we do a lot of talking, me and the actors, and it's mostly what not to do. Because I'm not really interested in what to do, because then I know what's going to happen. I would like to see what's going to happen. Like, I'm more interested in asking art, what are you not, rather than what you are, because I get high on the discovery process, the actual activity of creating. The final product, I don't really have a lot of interest in. Like, I never see my films after I'm done with them. I've been forced to do it twice at Cannes, and I hate it. It's the fucking worst thing in the world. I have no interest in it, because it no longer, I have no joy in it, because the process of creating is over. And it's like, and it has no meaning to me. But the rehearsal period is very much consists of just trying things out, doing all the mistakes, and being open about that, and really, because it's a very intimate arena. And then in chronological order, I would say halfway into shooting, it just starts to dictate itself. For some strange reason, it always ends up like that. It's almost like the film starts to create its own DNA.
Yes. Hold on a second. Let's see your microphone.
In the beginning, you talked about you didn't want to deal with headaches. I'm going into my second year of grad film at NYU, and I just shot a film, and I had an actor on set that was a complete headache. And you didn't see it coming at first. Like, rehearsal was great and everything. So I want to know, in your opinion, when you're on set and the person happens to be a headache, how do you handle that, and what steps do you take to try to mitigate it?
Well, I have had a lot of problem with aspirins because of this. Look, the thing is that because filmmaking is a combination of so many different talent and various art forms combining in a way, because filmmaking is a director's medium in the end. That's essentially what it is. So they're all there to kind of be part of whatever you want to do. And it's a bit like being a kindergarten teacher, going back to that analysis. You have to create the harmony. You have to be strict. You have to be kind. You have to be open. You have to be, sometimes you just want to scream in their faces, but then you smile at them and you go, interesting, okay, all right, you don't want to do that, all right, okay, What else then would, it's manipulation. It's like the worst thing you can do is cave in and become hysterical, because then everybody just loses interest. So it's like being the ultimate parent, and that can be pretty excruciating sometimes.
You've talked about that after you complete, like you edit the film like 1,000 different ways with the editor Matt Newman.
Yeah.
Have you ever found yourself having to cut around somebody?
Not lately, but in the past, yeah, I probably cut down on people, or yeah. I mean, my father's an editor, so I grew up on Steinbeck's and those kind of places. So, but I haven't really been not cutting around, no. But I know of other people that have, and I certainly have. I see films where I can see where that's an issue. But there are times when you just want to get it in the can and just get the fuck out of here and then deal with it afterwards. But there is no answer to that question you have, because it's so individual the way you handle it. My experience has always been love them till death. Even how much of a fucking pain in the ass it is, love them till death, you know?
All right, let's get somebody in the back here. You in the fourth corner. You, yes. Hold on, we need to get a microphone up to you.
Hi. First of all, the trailer is like the best trailer I've ever seen, so thank you for that. But my question is, you have made films that have often been interpreted in very strange ways. For example, there was some woman who sued or something, or accused you of being anti-Semitic in Drive, and other people associated with the Occupy movement, other crazy things. Anyway, so what do you feel? Do you ever feel that you're ever trying to sort of attach some sort of agenda, obviously not being anti-Semitic, but attach some sort of agenda to a film, and or are you really just trying to create a story on its own? And what's the weirdest interpretation of a film that you've ever heard somebody got?
Well, I'm not a political filmmaker, so I have no agendas. I have no specific points of view. On the contrary, I love chaos and anarchy in terms of that aspect in art. I think everything is open and accessible. I've experienced a lot of things. I've been called a lot of things over the years, and certainly on this latest film, there's been very polarized opinions of myself. The oddest thing lately has been in Cannes. A woman came up to me in a very German accent, and she said to me, "I think this movie takes place in the vagina, yes?" But what was really interesting was that I said, "I think you're right." I just never thought of it like that, but that is, oh my God, thank you so much.
So for the Bangkok Travel Commission, so I'll do that. Okay, who we have here? You in the far corner.
Far back, it's me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Nicolas. I just want to say thank you so much for producing an aesthetic that we're not desensitized to yet. I mean, I feel like violence for violence sake is something that just is it doesn't affect us anymore, but you use violence to tell a story. So that's what my question's about. As a writer, it's astounding that you have that confidence to let your writing develop itself. So from the note card process to using chronological shoots, have you always had that confidence in your writing, or did you realize this is the best way for your stories to come out?
Well, it's actually something I stole from John Cassavetes. When I made my first film, my mother, and I was 24 when I made my first film, my mother gave me one of those Cassavetes books that was extremely boring because it was very analytical. So I skipped almost every page until I got to one area where he talked about shooting this film in chronological order. And I go, well, if he did it, I can do it. Not really knowing what that actually meant in terms of pros and cons. But I think it had to do with that when I was in my late teens, I went to see Killing of a Chinese Bookie at a Cinematheque in Copenhagen. I just remember saying, I want that kind of acting. How do you do that? And I went to the same acting school as John Cassavetes did in New York, New York Academy of Dramatic Arts. Hated it. But so when the chronology came in, it became more the sense that I like to see it unfolding, and I realized that if I don't do it like this, it just doesn't really interest me very much. It's like it just all becomes mechanics, and it just doesn't excite me, and I just accepted that fact. I always considered violence like bad pornography. There's nothing worse than bad pornography, and that's how I see a lot of violence becoming. But, erotica is so much more exciting. So violence essentially works more or less in subliminal images. That's when it really becomes powerful and has an effect.
So it's kind of like that organism again. Once the film is finished, you're no longer in the process of creating it.
I climaxed. And it was over.
Now, let me touch on the shooting chronologically, because a lot of filmmakers, because of budget, they just don't have that option. They have to use, they have to shoot everything out of one location and move on. Have you just been incredibly fortunate that you've either been able to map out your budgets effectively enough to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically something you got. It's a choice in the beginning, and it hurts. It costs. But my budgets have mostly been between $500,000 to $3.5 to $3. Drive was 14, but it was LA, so it was still like making a $3 million movie, because the equivalent of time I had doing Drive was the same thing I had like on doing, this movie in Bangkok or something like that. So it's something that it's a conscious decision, and I certainly give up. I give up other things, like production design, for example, usually gets cut down to minimal, because I need money to buy days, or I need money to buy company movement or things like that.
Okay, who we have next? Somebody in the middle, you in the hat.
Hey, how you doing? Big fan from the Pusher trilogy. Those are awesome movies. But one of my favorite aspects of your movies are the soundtracks. For example, Bronson, you have The Electrician, Glass Candy, Drive, you have Tick of the Clock by the Chromatics. How do you go about picking your soundtracks?
Well, I love music. I can't play a note in my life or sing a song, but I don't do drugs anymore. So music is very much a way of heighten emotions, a way to kind of get inspired. And a lot of my films comes out of ideas of music. And I even have this trick where I try to, when I'm working on a movie, I try to figure out if it was a kind of music, what would it be? And then I would listen to that type or genre of music. Still drives people crazy. I mean, on Bronson, the idea was that if this was a piece of music, it would be the Pet Shop Boys. All right. So for like 4 months, Pet Shop Boys would be playing a lot, driving everybody else insane. But it kind of keeps you in that mode of what you're doing. On Drive, it was Kraftwerk, the idea of electronic music that had a romanticized feel to it, but yet it was part of the future because it was so pure, in a sense. So things are different at different areas that inspires you. But I just generally like all kinds of music. And then my biggest most important collaborator is my editor, Matt Newman, who we have done 4 movies together. And he's a big part of that musical because he really likes, I'm that kind of guy who's still like, oh great, we got a Duran Duran compilation. But he'll be like, well, let's try other stuff as well, and then he'll come with sometimes some options, and then I'll say what I like and I don't like and things like that.
Do you find yourself, do you enjoy cutting to music as opposed to putting music?
Yes, very much. I mean, we use a lot of source music when we cut. And then I cut the films in a trillion different kind of ways because the idea of images telling a story, and if you combine the images in different ways, you always get different kinds of stories. So it's a way to figure out what can your material actually do, what could it actually mean. I very much enjoy that part of it.
Okay, we have time for two more. 2 more questions, and I'm going to go right to you in the middle. And wait,
So my question has to do with ethics. Most of your films don't really abide by any sort of Christian sentimental ethics. Like The Driver, he does his job like a CIA agent until the girl comes along and it becomes about protecting her and her son. In Bronson, he just wants to destroy. My question is, does Julian have his own moral code that's unique to him, or do we get to see him find one?
The idea of the Julian character came about, what would the world be like if you were chained to your mother's womb? You know, of course, in reality, that means if you have a controlling mother. But in heightened reality, that's what essentially you are. And then you become what we describe as a sleepwalker. You're basically awake, but you have no control over your life. And every time you try to rebel against your mother, she overpowers you and belittles you and dehumanizes you and degrades you. So he's a character of that is on a journey without knowing the result, which, you know, usually in every writing prospect you learn, make sure your protagonist has a point of view, make sure your protagonist has an agenda, make sure your protagonist has something to lose. And that's true, but it's not always the fun thing to do. And certainly you can twist those concepts around, like start, middle, and end you can twist around. So the idea of Julian essentially being everything around evolves around him, but he's the one who doesn't move physically, but only mentally.
Okay, the last question. No pressure. And right here.
2
And
seconds.
wait, no microphone.
Sorry.
I can actually hear you from here. No.
That's right.
Oh, okay. My question is kind of typical, but I kind of really wanted to ask it because I think it's still important to a lot of people in this room. And it's just, if you had to offer like any piece of advice whatsoever to aspiring filmmakers, like anywhere, what would you say?
Okay,
In terms
it's
of
your advice. Everybody's going to follow this.
Not in that way.
The gospel according to Nicolas.
Yes. I asked that very same question when I was 24 to Eli Kazan in Stockholm. We were having ice cream. And true. And I was, so Eli, what advice would you give a young filmmaker? And he said to me, my advice to you, and I'll come with an explanation afterwards. My advice to you, he said, is do it your way. Now, at 24, that meant one thing for me. You know, that was like, yeah, man, fuck that. I'm the king of the world. Move away. I'm God. But my way also meant when I didn't have as much luck and I failed, that I remembered what my way could also mean. So in a way, it's a way to describe that your career is going to vary. It's going to have its ups and downs. It's going to have its heartache. It's going to have its joy. It's going to feel all the pleasure. And don't forget, the more pleasure it is, the harder it is going to be to fall. But without falling, you're never going to feel the pleasure. So I thought in the end, his idea of saying to me, do it your way, just meant that make the films you want to make, be prepared, but in the end, make them how you want to make them.
Great way to close it. Thank you, Nicolas, for coming by.